As democratic exercises go, the upcoming referendum in Great Britain on the country's relationship with the European Union comes down to a simple question. Are you in or are you out? Then why, as the June 23rd vote approaches, is there so much confusion? And how is it that a study conducted by the London School of Economics has concluded that British voters with so many media outlets at their disposal are the worst informed people in Europe when it comes to the EU? On the Prince side, the British news media are notoriously, some would say gloriously, partisan. Many of the politicians who want Britain to stay in are part of what their critics have come to call Project Fear, scaring voters with nightmare scenarios, particularly relating to the economy, should Britons vote to get out. That message is dutifully reflected through newspapers aligned with that side. Those advocating a Brexit from the EU are not above using fear tactics themselves. Scary headlines about uncontrolled migration, for instance. At least part of the responsibility lies with the politicians and their rhetoric. But if the news media cannot get beyond that in order to provide context and facts, all that remains are the prejudices that the media and the British people brought to this debate in the first place. Our starting point this week is London. The politicians on either side of this debate and the media outlets that stand with them have something in common with their adversaries. Both sides are using fear as a weapon, as a sales tool.
Almost as the campaign began, we were looking at the Prime Minister, who was speaking on the major political television discussion programme, The Marr Show, and 5 times he talked about
a leap in the dark,
a leap into the dark,
a step into the dark,
a leap into the unknown.
I think it's uncertainty. I think it's a leap in the dark.
Project Fear was born that day.
The Daily Mail among the media has embraced this, and the red rubber stamp inevitably appears on any coverage of Remain arguments, undermining what's being put forward in those stories. But the Brexiters are using just as much of a scaremongering tactic as the Remain campaign. The immigration story seems to be their chief weapon.
The print media has started off very pro-Brexit while going in really, really hard on the immigration issue. The stories were about either immigrants or people smugglers or immigrants on benefits, and what they're left with is the kind of bare bones of their argument, which is a foreigner is going to get your job and get your house, and this is the only way to stop him.
Even the Remain camp don't have much to say that is positive about the European Union. They have lots of horrible things to say about what will happen if we leave. It's a sad fact of electoral experience around the world that fear works.
And this passport is available to 508 million people.
Fear is a really good campaigning tool, so we shouldn't be too surprised that the campaigns in this referendum are using it.
Usually, the right-wing bias of most British papers works in favour of a Conservative Prime Minister like David Cameron. But not this time, since they are to the right of Cameron on this issue. A survey by the Reuters Institute for the Study of Journalism examined articles in 9 newspapers in the first 2 months of the campaign. It added up to 928 articles, 45% of which favored the Leave side versus 27% in favor of Remain. Media ownership and ideology have an effect on those figures. There are more conservative papers in the UK, including The Sun and The Times, both owned by Rupert Murdoch's News Corporation, plus the Daily Mail and The Telegraph, and they sell in greater numbers than liberal papers such as The Mirror and The Guardian.
Rupert Murdoch, he's got 2 major newspapers, The Sun and The Sunday Sun. He's been an avowed outer for many, many years. The Daily Mail thinks, as do I, that the European Union is too big, unaccountable, undemocratic. The Guardian, which is a small circulation newspaper these days, is in favour of Remain. So is the Daily Mirror.
There is an inbuilt right-wing bias in the UK print media, and this plays very well for the Brexit campaign. Beyond that, I suspect that there is a real instinct among journalists for the Brexit story as more exciting to them than the Remain story, which is about the status quo. Brexit is about dynamic radical change. That's something that appeals to print journalists especially.
There's a same sort of
And the British press, the newspaper industry, can influence what is then broadcast on television and radio. There is no hard data to confirm that that has occurred during this referendum campaign. However, that agenda-setting phenomenon has been documented before, as recently as last year, during national parliamentary elections, in which Prime Minister Cameron and his Conservative Party prevailed.
On occasion, it's absolutely true that the print media can set the agenda if they break big stories. What we don't have in the UK is the situation you have in the United States, where you can surround yourself purely with your own views. Because in the US, of course, the advent of Fox means that you can watch Fox, you can listen to right-wing talk show hosts and never be exposed to other opinions. I think the fact that we still have the BBC and ITV means that most people are still having to listen to views they don't agree with.
The newspapers are still very influential. Their revenue streams are not delivering for them. Print circulation has gone through the floor, but their reach is bigger than ever. The traditional media has had its voice amplified by sites such as Facebook, for example. They might not be getting the income from that they would like, but they continue to make their voices heard.
Stories shared, voices heard. But to what effect? According to a study of EU data conducted by the London School of Economics, when European citizens were asked basic questions about the EU, no one scored lower marks than the British. Part of that is down to education, schooling, but some of the responsibility must lie with the news media. Most British news consumers just don't trust their newspapers in particular. Another EU study last year concluded that almost 3 out of 4 Britons do not tend to trust the printed press, the highest figure of all EU states by a significant margin. And there is no reason to expect that after all this referendum coverage, the dueling editorial agendas, personalities trumping policy, often served with a side order of fear that the UK press will emerge with its reputation enhanced.
What I found uniquely depressing about the EU referendum and the UK media is that this was an opportunity for British people to make a case or to hear a case and talk about what they wanted Europe to look like and what they wanted the UK to look like. We didn't do that. And I do blame the media. We could have had a bigger conversation and we didn't.
Is that a reflection of the British media? No, it's not actually. It's exactly the point about why the Daily Mail and others think the European Union is not working. It's the task of the European Union, in my view, to make themselves relevant to our lives. It's too remote, it's too obscure, it's their fault. It's not us in the media.
But is it not the job of the journalist, when confronted by a complicated story or a complex institution such as the EU, to get past those complexities and report the story in a way audiences find relevant? That's not the institution's role, it's the news media's. And British journalists do like to call Brussels remote. It's not. It's a 2-hour train ride from London. It takes them longer to get to Manchester. They don't even need a visa to get there. At least, not yet. On the download now, our viewers on the coverage of Britain's referendum.
Personally, I'm completely avoiding all mainstream media coverage of the EU referendum. I find it all so insufferably biased and inaccurate. It's just fear-mongering and propaganda. One thing I do engage with is social media memes. At least they're entertaining.